You see what you said?
Yes. Yes. 86 and so much fun. 94. And I'm not fully diagnosed. And I don't know whether you can. So I am to 2 hours sleep.
2 hours sleep.
I get up at 5:45. I get up an hour later and take the bus. Later, I get there after. So today I didn't have to wait because the bus for detours. I was Santa Cruz instead of coming off on Valencia, went off on Newhall. And around.
There was some accident over on the side.
Apparently there was.
Good morning, everyone. We're just
I figured that.
getting everything streaming.
Good morning.
Good morning.
U-Haul and the Lions over the old road, when the up road, you get on the Valencia.
Morning.
That's a quite good time. So from there, I knew where we were. Still feels more like home. And actually, it is my home. The manager referred to it as my house. Basement person, I've got 3 to 4, but not from my door yesterday. My God, it just got my bed, that above that branch. Looks like quarter there. It's just like a bit of storage bed. You go out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, about Sunday, tell them ladies to get a little food.
We're gonna get started, everyone.
Still, people are still coming in from the outside, but we are bringing people in and still bringing people in from different places. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And again, thank you, everybody, for a wonderful night on Sunday night. We had a very busy weekend. We had an amazing Beatles Shabbat on Friday night, which was really well attended and really well celebrated by people. And we had a lot of people actually joined us virtually, a lot of people online, a lot of people joined us from different places, which was really cool. And it was great music. And then the event on Sunday was a lot of fun. We had a great time and I mean, it was just, again, really well attended, and I wasn't hungover. I didn't have that much to drink. And I was, yeah, we were celebrating, but no, I really didn't. And then, yeah, it was a busy couple of days. And then what's interesting is it's a really busy couple of days coming up because we have Shavuot tonight. It starts tonight and goes through tomorrow. Again, for people who celebrate Shavuot over 2 days, technically goes through Thursday. So Shavuot is the annual celebration of receiving Torah. It's a time when lots of synagogues do Torah studies, and some do all night Torah studies. We haven't done an all night one before.
Was it Tuesday night? We liked your.
Yep, exactly. So Tuesday night, we traditionally, well, if you celebrate over 1 day, if you celebrate over 2 days, you'd put it up Wednesday night, but most people celebrate it for 1 day. No, let me rephrase that. Most people celebrate it for 0 days, but for people who celebrate it for 1 day, you do it. Yeah. So Yizkor is on the 3 pilgrimage holidays, the Shalosh, what we call the Shalosh Regalim, and then they are with the addition of Yom Kippur as well. which is interesting because it kind of shows you that the three pilgrimage holidays, Passover, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, were really the prime holidays. And then later on, we kind of added Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah to our cycle. And now, of course, they're like the most important holidays. But that was funny, actually. The comedian who performed Sunday night,
She was.
stop, Jackie Gold, she said that coming to the event counted as one time for the 2-time-a-year Jews. So
That's the funniest thing she said.
she was very Jewishly knowledgeable. So she was, it was funny. I don't know if you caught what Kaplan said to her, which was, "This is my second wife, Jackie Gold." Because she did a whole thing about being married to a divorcee or a widow because she's, gotten older she's only going to be dating people who fall in that demographic. So that's when Kaplan said she's going to be his second wife, which I thought was cute. Anyways, but Kaplan did a wonderful job.
Great.
Yeah, and it was really special that he came, and we had some people that came from far away, like the Kaufmans, and it was just really a special treat to have people that we don't get to see a lot, raising up my table a little bit. But again, it was a great time. So yeah, I was stalling a little bit for the people who are outside to come in, but whatever. If they're not in, they're not in. But what's so awesome, the last week, we introduced everybody to the fact that we're singing Psalms. Well, we're reading Psalms, but we're also going to be singing Psalms every week. So every week we have a few Psalms that we're going to be listening to that come from very different genres to kind of remind us that our Psalms have become so important for people around the world. I mean, literally, people in every country, every nationality, every culture, every language, have celebrated Psalms and have sung songs from the Bible. And so the Psalms that we have today reflect years and years of accumulation of very different genres. And, for people who have, wide varieties of musical tastes, you're in luck because we're going to play lots of different Psalms.
Great last night, we go square dancing
Uh-huh.
on Monday.
Yeah.
And the square dance choir Hallelujah has a square dance song.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Psalm 150 is great.
That's really cool. Yeah, there are people musicians who've really concentrated on singing Psalms. Like I found, over the years, there's especially, Christian gospel singers that have tried to do that. I don't know too many Jewish musicians that have really tried to do, to try to find Psalms of all different, of all different types. Or I mean, of all different, going through all the, well, here's what I'm going to tell you. Most of the Jewish musicians have tried to find or compose a music for Psalms that are part of the liturgy, ones that are already part of our prayers. And there are Psalms that, obviously like Psalm 150 or Psalm 145, the Ashrei, they're part of our daily liturgy. Psalms like Hine Matovu Manaim, Psalm 133, which are used all over the place. Oh yeah, we'll get to it. It's towards the end, obviously. It's 133 out of 150. But there are Psalms that are part of our liturgy that people have kind of focused on and said, hey, this is the Psalm that I've been singing my whole life. It's part of our tradition. And so, I want to do a version of it. So that is what I will tell you that some people have done, and in the Jewish community, but to literally sit down and compose a musical accompaniment or, whatever you want to say, a version of every Psalm. I don't know if a Jewish musician has ever done that. There are Christian musicians who have done it. And I gotta say, I mean, you can't write 150 amazing songs. There's no musician that I'm going to share with you every Psalm that they put to music, but I think the best versions of the Psalms that, and again, I'm going to give you lots of different ones. The one today you'll hear is, and some days we'll do like 2 or 3, and sometimes we'll hear 2 or 3 of the, like when we do Hine Matov, you know, where I'll play you 4 different versions of Hine Matov that capture different ways of singing that, and ones that are not Jewish either, by the way. But I actually heard somebody, a minister quote Psalm 133 yesterday in a documentary. So yeah, I think one of the things about Psalms is that when people think about what the Psalm means to them, it resonates because of who sang it, where they heard it, the fact that it was part of their prayers every day. They sang it in synagogue, they sang it in church, their parents sang it. And so then people feel connected to that psalm. And there's 150 of them. So people have different feelings about certain psalms. So again, if you well, his hallelujah, right, is but what's interesting about his hallelujah is that it really is a summary of the Psalms, and to some extent the story of David, and to some extent like a human being's emotions. So it's not just like one thing. It's not one psalm.
You hear Jewish people sing it, and you also hear Christian people sing that song. It's just great.
Oh, I mean, that song arguably has become one of the most powerful religious songs, you know, that has come out in the last 50 years. I mean, I don't know that, yeah, I don't know that, I don't know that there's a psalm or for that matter, a religious song that's been as, but
The
it's
first
been as,
one I heard though was, I forgot his name, but it was on or Russian, he had a piano player that once in a while we'll see it on Friday nights with his kid. And that's the first time I heard him, he did it at home. That was a long time ago.
Is it Gabriel?
Yeah, Gabriel.
yeah. Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at Psalms. So last week we read only the first 4 because we talked a lot about Psalms. We talked about Psalms for about 45 minutes about some of the things that we'll see in Psalms. But again, every week it's completely unconnected to the previous ones because the Psalms are a collection. There's 150 of them, as I mentioned. There's roughly 5 books of 30. It's not exact, but it comes out to about 5 books of 30. There were more Psalms than these. We know that for a lot of reasons, not least of which there are references to Psalms to some extent in the Bible where we know that there must have been a Psalm version of that. But more importantly, it's clear that these came from different collections. A lot of them have a superscription, which means it says a Psalm of David. About 130 of the Psalms, 120 of the Psalms have some kind of superscription. Sometimes the Psalm of David is the most famous one, Mizmor LeDavid. And oftentimes there'll also be an indication of the way it was supposed to be played, the direction that it was supposed to be played by, or the way it was supposed to be directed by the composer. This one, when it says Lam Natseach, it means to the leader, to the conductor. Then it says Al Nechilot, which again, it says Hebrew meaning of Hebrew uncertain. It's probably the beat of the tempo of the psalm, or it's possible in some cases, and in some cases it varies clear. It's very clearly an indication of what instruments it was played on. So if it was a string instrument, we'll see that, and then of course who by tradition did this psalm, was it written by, or maybe who was collected by. We obviously follow the tradition that King David wrote these psalms. He didn't just collect them, but some people feel that he collected them, that he was more of an editor or a collector of psalms rather than the composer of psalms. but, you know, by tradition, we follow that he actually wrote these. So there's Psalm 5. So there's that, yeah. So there's actually three things here for the leader, but again, for the leader is usually followed by what you do with it, you know, for the leader, but that's why they have the semicolon, for the leader on the Nehilot, and then a Psalm of David. So think about it as either 2 or 3 different ideas here that we'll sometimes see. Because sometimes it doesn't say for the leader, it'll just say all Gitit or all, you know, all Shminit. And then it'll say, you know, sometimes it'll say Mizmor LeDavid, sometimes it won't. You know, sometimes it'll say a song of the Korahites, which is also a weird kind of thing we'll get into when we see it. But those are the directions. Every single psalm that we're going to read, there was a point in time when there was no number on it. There was no number. The Christians added the numbers to these. We did not call them Psalm 23. When King David sat down and wrote, he did not say, oh, and this is Psalm 23. He called it, the psalm begins with the words, right? Adonai roi lo echsar. The Lord is my shepherd. I will not be afraid, right? That's what it was called. He did not call it by a number. He called it by the first line of the poem. That is the way poetry was generally, and songs, both, were collected and attributed in the ancient world. That's going to be very critical in the next couple of weeks as we talk about Psalm 23 and Psalm 22 and some of the Psalms that are really, really important that we never called it Psalm 23. We never called it that until we kind of lived under with Christians. So that you would never have seen that in a prayer book, in a Siddur. You wouldn't have said from Psalm 23. The Christians started putting them in the Bible about 1600 years ago. They became accepted standardized forms of numbers. Again, we talked about it. The Eastern Orthodox Church has some slightly different numbering. But it goes back, again, I mean, the Greeks and the Romans were very into numbering things. So the Christians didn't just say, hey, let's number things. The Greeks and Romans did. And so they would have book numbers and they would have chapter numbers and they would have paragraph, you know, essentially paragraph numbers. And so the Jews accepted that kind of like from Christians for the sake of standardization. So we'd all say, hey, we're on the same page. But Jewish people, I'm telling you, your great grandparents never would have said, oh, Psalm 23, let's do Psalm 23 now. They would have thought you're crazy. What's Psalm 23? They would never have called it Psalm 23. Well, it's not just that it's late for Jews to have accepted it and gone with that too. So our Hebrew Bibles were oftentimes, and again, of course, the Torah has no chapters and verses. There's no indication when a chapter is done. These people, our recent relatives, knew these Psalms by heart, and they knew them by the first line. And by the way, that's the way other cultures that are not Greco-Roman based do things. I mean, Japanese poetry, you know, if you just saw Shogun, for example, the people do a poem by what's called the incipit, the first line, and that's how they know the poem. They would say, oh, this poem is called, you know, the parable, you know, the cherry blossom opens in the wind or something, and that's what they would know it by.
I'm assuming my great grandparents also, when they read they read Hebrew.
Yep, they were read in Hebrew. In cases where they, you know, read them in Yiddish or whatever, you know, they translated them sometimes for people, and they would, like, you know, people would quote them and kind of like, you know them also kind of in Yiddish or know phrases of them. But yeah, Hebrew, it was definitely considered Loshen Kodesh because it was the Bible. And Psalms were very, very important to our ancestors, as we said. Psalms were said constantly by our families, and they're still said in the religious world every day, multiple times a day. People are going through Tehillim and going through Psalms. It is the most read part of the Bible by the Jewish people throughout time, by far. Again, we read the Torah every week. We read the Parsha Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at shul. All that stuff is true. But on a daily basis, people would read more Psalms than anything else. As far as
Just
how
to read
much,
more purple.
yeah, how they would consume it. What?
No, I was just going to ask, how do we know that it's attributed to David? You probably said this
No,
before.
we
but
don't. No, we don't. I mean, the tradition that he wrote them is very old. So it says in the Bible that he wrote Psalms. By the time that these superscriptions are there, again, some of them go back 2,500 years. So people definitely by the time of the Talmud and the Midrash, like he wrote those Psalms. And again, even the Talmud, interestingly, says he wrote a lot more Psalms than we have. He wrote thousands of Psalms, the Talmud says. So, the idea that this is only part of the Psalms, the rabbis essentially knew that. And kind of said so. I mean, they admitted it. And again, we don't know how many were actually written by David. Biblical scholars will sometimes go through the Psalms and say, well, that language doesn't seem like it's from that period. But I think for the most part, most of the Psalms are written in a form of Hebrew that's old. We talked about it. We found Ugaritic Canaanite texts that are very similar in some cases to our Psalms. Similar structures, similar grammatic structures too. In some cases, literally like taking out the word Baal and putting in the word Adonai, almost, the same kind of line. So that shows us that there was a lot of cultural affinity.
Aren't some Egyptian too? They come out of
Interestingly, we haven't found a lot of similarities to Egyptian, more from Canaanite, and some people have found similarities to more of the Near Eastern, Babylonian, Akkadian type Psalms. They find some closer similarities to that, which kind of makes sense because according to tradition, that's where Abraham came from. Our Semitic languages are based on the Mesopotamian culture and those languages. So it kind of makes sense that the structures would be similar, but not as much with the Egyptians. So the most closely related to Canaanite. Next would be the Assyrian, Mesopotamian, and then some people have said that they're similar to the Egyptian, but some of the Egyptian, but not really. Are any of the Psalms in Aramaic? No, none of the Psalms have Aramisms in them, which means that they're older than the later parts of the Bible, like Daniel, that has Aramaic in it. And Aramisms, which are like words that we think are Hebrew versions of Aramaic. But yeah, I mean, it's possible that King David wrote these. I haven't heard a lot of people knock down the Psalms as, necessarily from the Second Temple period, which means like from 500 BC on. So a lot of people think, yeah, the Psalms could have been written 800, 900 BCE, just, 3,000 years ago. So we've been singing some of these songs. I think it's pretty safe to say some of them probably go back almost 3,000 years. We found every Psalm in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, we found every one of these Psalms. There's a piece of them in I think every Psalm. I'll check, but I think every Psalm is represented, some part of it, which also tells you how important they were to the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But again, by the Second Temple period, by the late Second Temple period, which we're talking about 2,000 years ago, Psalms were huge. I mean, they were part of the temple service. They were part of synagogue services, which had already started by that time. Remember, synagogue started while the temple was still there. So people were singing Psalms. And I would guess that's probably one of the main things that they did was sing Psalms, would sing the Psalms in the synagogues. Churches started singing Psalms pretty much right from the beginning. It's interesting to think about, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how the Psalms play out. Very importantly, the Psalms play out, and we'll talk about it soon, very, very strongly in the Christian Bible, because there's references to Psalms directly in the Christian Bible. But again, it shouldn't surprise us. That's from 2,000 years ago. We're talking about 3,000 years ago. People were already familiar with these. That's what we're talking about. Like by the time of Jesus, these were old. These were old. Like none of these were like new compositions. All right. So, and as I said, it's weird for us to think that some Psalms didn't make it. You know, we'd love to know what those Psalms were about or how, what beautiful words there were, but we don't have them. All right. So let's take a look at Psalm 5. This is where we're starting. And again, some of the Psalms are very short. Some of them are, 10 lines. So, Rosemary, if you'd be so kind.
Give ear to my speech, O Lord. Consider my utterance. Heed the sound of my cry, my King and God, for I pray to you. Hear my voice, O Lord, at daybreak. At daybreak I plead before you and wait. For you are not a God who desires wickedness. Evil cannot abide with you. Wanton men cannot endure in your sight. You detest all evildoers. You doom those who speak lies. Murderous, deceitful men the Lord abhors. But I, through your abundant love, enter your house. I bow down in awe at your holy temple. O Lord, lead me along your righteous path because of my watchful foes. Make your way straight before me. For there is no sincerity on their lips. Their heart is filled with malice. Their throat is an open grave, their tongue slippery. Condemn them, O God. Let them fall by their own devices. Cast them out for their many crimes, for they defy you. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice, ever jubilant as you shelter them, and let those who love your name exult in you. For you surely bless the righteous man, O God, O Lord, encompassing him with favor like a shield.
Yep. So, very similar to some of the Psalms we saw last week and the Psalms that we'll see throughout. It's a psalm praising God for protecting, for shelter, for keeping us safe. What's interesting, of course, is that almost all the Psalms also carry the negative part too, right? So, let the bad people be destroyed. And so having both is a very common occurrence in the Psalms. So it's weird because, the Psalms, like, we usually focus on the upbeat part, right? Through abundant love, you enter your house. I bow down in awe at your holy temple. That's a beautiful line. The other part, you doom those who speak lies, murderous, deceitful men, the Lord abhors. Like, singing that seems kind of weird because it's kind of a downer, but look, it's part of what has to happen, right? We have to have those bad people get punished. But I will say that even in the ancient world, or we can kind of assume that people take out the parts that are the more positive parts. But look, even in the most, and I'll refer to it a lot because it's the psalm that we can always kind of go to in the back of our minds, right? Psalm 23. It's not all a pretty picture, right? I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You lie me down in green pastures, leave me beside the waters, all the nice part. But I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Well, it's great that God's taking care of me, but my enemies are there. So it's not all, even in that psalm, or maybe you could say especially in that psalm, but it's in most of the psalms. There's the dark side too. So the psalms don't just, for the most part, are only positive. There's usually at least a recognition of the negative that's there. And so I think people find that strange because, like, aren't they just upbeat? Well, they are. I mean, they all kind of have a good tone to some extent at the end, but they also are filled with, in some cases, really downer stuff and scary stuff. And so you're going to see that as a feature. Don't be surprised by it because it's all over the place. So, like, when you think about people singing these songs really beautifully, in some cases, the modern versions of these songs only fall on the first part or the opening part or the good part or the positive part. Like when we say Hine Matova Manayim, how wonderful it is for us to be together as one, we don't do the whole psalm. We do only part of the psalm. And here's an example of part of the psalm that made it into our liturgy. Here's a really important one. Well, wouldn't say it's super important, but I like to say it's important. It's line 8. Va'ani berov chazdecha avo veitecha, eshtach el chechal kodshecha b'yirtecha. I think about this because most people don't do this full version of this. They don't, does anyone know what prayer this comes from?
Very familiar.
I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
It's a prayer that you know really well, but a lot of times they don't do the whole, anybody? Anybody? Okay, pop it up here. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael, right? How beautiful are your tents, right? O Israel. And then we get down here, Bani berov chazdecha avo vetecha, eshtacha ve'elhecha kodshecha biratecha. So if you do the second line, you get that. But if you don't do the whole thing, you don't get that. So what's really nice about Matovu, which I always love, is that, again, it focuses on the positive. Like if you just read that line, you wouldn't be like, oh, it's, there's no negative here, right?
I thought the Matavu was with Baal, but I think his name was Baal. Bless the tribes instead of cursing them.
Yeah, that's where the first line comes from. You're absolutely right, Gail. So the first line comes from Balaam's prayer, his blessing that he says instead of the curse, right? How beautiful
Right.
your tents, right? So that first line is 100% from Numbers. And it was actually said, as you point out, by Balaam in Numbers chapter 25. But what's beautiful about the next line, which comes from Psalms, now, I will tell you what's beautiful about this prayer, and it shows you a little bit about the wisdom of Jewish prayer. The beauty of a Jewish prayer is it brings different parts of the Bible together, right? It weaves them together by taking piece here, piece there, put them together.
Yeah.
Yep. Lots of prayers. Aleinu is like that way. The Amidah has lines from Psalms and from different places. It's one of the things that we do. So we bring these together, we weave them together. What's so beautiful about those two lines in particular, but actually it's the first few lines. Translation kind of depends. I mean, this happens to be the Wikipedia page on it. But what's beautiful about this prayer, right, is you can see there's Psalms 5, and there's also Psalms 26, and Psalms 95, and Psalm 69. What's beautiful about the way this is woven together, though, I just want to show you for a quick second, is that the prayer says, how beautiful are your tents, right? Your dwelling places, your sanctuaries, right? Your mishkan, your encampments. But what we oftentimes have said is that what's interesting about it is it tells us that our homes, our tents, our personal abode, as well as our sanctuaries, have to be beautiful, right? Are meant to be beautiful. So our homes and our sanctuaries. What's interesting about the next line, though, is it says, "Va'ani berov chazdecha," in abundant grace, berov chazdecha, avo veitecha, eshtacha el hechal kodshecha. Look what the next line does. I will enter your house to worship in your sacred place, or I would actually also, you could say, in your palace, in your castle, because the words eshtachaveh in you, I will bow in your hechal and in your beit techa. So what's interesting about this is it has two words, bait and hechal, where the first line has ohel and mishkan. So look what they did. They brought in a line from Numbers and a line from Psalms. And what it does is the first one has tense and like I said, I don't love the translation here. Let's actually, well, I could show you. I'd have to bring together Numbers and Psalms. So let's just look at it here. And then here you have house and sacred place. So again, the word in Hebrew is ohel and mishkan. And in the next line, it is hechal, beitecha, bait, and hechal. So you understand you have this parallel between your tent and your sanctuary, your house, your bait, and your hechal. And what's so cool about those is that you could see both of them as an ohel and a bait, right? Your tent, your temporary dwelling, and your bite and your permanent dwelling. Your bite is your house. And when we were in our tent, we had the Mishkan, we had the tabernacle. So when we were in a tent, God was in a tent. When we were in a house, a bite, God was in a heichal, God was in a castle. God was in the palace, the great, again, however you're going to translate the word heichal, it's the temple. It was the great temple, right? So in Hebrew, we translate, in the line, it's translated as temple. But when we're in a ohel, God's in a tabernacle. When we're in a house, God's in the heichal. So God follows us. God's with us in these different places. So you can say like a temporary place, a permanent place. But also, again, if you want to think about it this way, when we're in our homes and when we're in our places that we congregate together, wherever that is, whether it's, with our community, wherever we are. So our personal space and our communal space, whether it's a tent or whether it's a house, whether it's a permanent building.
Does that have?
I don't know, but a bayit and a heichal definitely are permanent structures.
Like
So-
when we're out at the beach.
Yeah. So when we're at the beach, God is at the beach. God, so I think what's beautiful about the prayer is that it wove these things together. Look, the psalm clearly is talking about, in the psalm, in verse 8 that we just looked at, it is, you could say that it's a poetic structure. God is in the bayit, God is in the house, and God is in the heichal. It's the same thing. But even here, they translated it as house and temple. There's an understanding that a bayit could be a house, whereas a heichal is a palace. And so God's palace and our house are parallel. And to some extent, obviously, God is in both with us. So it's a beautiful line. It's a beautiful line here in Psalms. And of course, we incorporated it into our liturgy, into Ma Tovu. Again, it's kind of weird because sometimes we just sing the first line. We don't do Va'ani Barov Chazdecha. But I will tell you, it is part of the Ma Tovu. And I will tell you that theme of where we are when we praise God is definitely in Ma Tovu. That's definitely the theme of it. Anybody else have any stuff to say about Psalm 5? It's 13 lines, and that line 8 is definitely. I'm trying to see if there's any other lines that stick out that make their way through. Make our way through. Some people, I mean, this line's been quoted before. Adonai boker tishma, hear my voice, O Lord, at daybreak, in the boker, in the morning. At daybreak, I plead before you and wait. This idea that, you wake up with, I'm waking up with prayers to you. Hear my voice, God. That's a nice idea too, that, I'm waking up. I'm waking up with God. I'm rising with God. All right. Well, with that, let's look at Psalm 6 then, because there are a couple of directions here. And again, people usually don't sing the superscription. They normally don't put this line to music. Sometimes if it's short, they do, but people recognize that this is a direction. This isn't like these aren't the words of the Psalm. So nobody said Psalm 6 is Lam Natseach B'Nigyo. That's not, because there are Psalms that begin with the same kinds of opening, especially the Mizmor LeDavid, a Psalm of David. There's a whole bunch of Psalms that begin, so he couldn't begin like that, right? But the Psalm would have been known as Adonai Be'apecha, which is, by the way, not a super happy opening, right? But again, this one, Psalm, it's for the leader, Lam Natseach, again, conductor direction. It's a nigyon, which they translate as an instrumental. As I told you, it's the origin of the word nigun that we use in Hebrew or in Yiddish. The way we say a nigun, an instrumental piece, a piece that didn't necessarily have words, is what we say for a nigun today. A lai lai or a ya, a ya, that's a nigun. But in the ancient world, we understood that as this is an instrument. And the word here is shminit, right? Now, we know the meaning is somewhat uncertain, but some translation, Mary, what does yours say? Oh, just says shmini, didn't translate it. Anybody else have anything? John, do you have a note on there? No? What does it say? For shmini for the first line, for number one, for not line one. Oh, just says uncertain. Glory, does your Bible have something on it
In the notes, let me see here.
for line one?
For line one, for the director of music with string instruments, according to Shemi, a Psalm of David. That's all it
It
says.
doesn't say what a shminit is.
Well, I'm looking in the notes. I don't know if this is part of it. Occurs also in Psalm 12 title and in something else. It perhaps refers to an 8-stringed instrument. Is that part of it?
That's it. That's the key. So we know the word shmona means 8. So we believe that the shminit is an 8-string instrument, which again tells us maybe that this is for a special instrument, playing the lead, the way that some pieces said this is for a violin. This is the violin concerto, that maybe the shminit was the 8-string lyre, and people, maybe more than one person played it. Maybe one person played it and accompanied, but we do believe that this had something to do with the instrument that it was played. It could have been like an 8-part harmony. I mean, it's possible, but it does seem that because there's a nigion, which we understand to be musical instrument, and that's why it says instrumental, that the direction after that is all hashmini, means on that, which seems to be, how do we play it? We play it on, and we still say that, right? We play this on the piano. We play this on the guitar. And it doesn't literally mean like I sit on my guitar and play it, right? I'm playing it on a guitar. So we still use that same direction even today, right? Where I'm going to play this on the guitar now. So that's why we think that it's probably what the instrument was that they played, but we don't know for sure, which is why it says uncertain, or it doesn't translate it, it just transliterates it. But we'll see that occasionally. And when it's something like this, where we think it kind of makes sense that it's connected to 8, that it probably was an 8-string instrument, I want you to know that. And thankfully, Glory's translation actually pointed that out, that that's probably what it means. And that's what, again, we don't know for sure, but it'll be interesting to see. Have people tried to figure out what that 8-string? Absolutely. There are people who've tried to recreate biblical instruments, try to make some of those sounds. We don't know for sure. And again, it's kind of like going back in time and trying to figure out, well, how early did we have these? You have to do that through archaeology, through records of, pictures of what instruments look like, mainly through carving and through anything that would have survived that would have had that kind of design. The Egyptians, obviously, we have archaeological evidence of the instruments that they played, both we found in some of the tombs, but also in some of the carvings that we have depicting their instruments. So, we try. I mean, we don't know for sure, but it's very important to understand that our ancestors played instruments. I mean, 95% sure that this is what it's about. It's about instruments, based on, again, the word nigion on it, and the fact that, gosh, it sure seems like al shminit isn't about the harmony level.
A kid asked me the other day, I didn't have the answer, was, do we play instruments at funerals? Isn't there a thing that Kohanim are not allowed to play an instrument for like a year when they're in mourning?
So there's a tradition that nobody who's in mourning is allowed to play an instrument while they're in mourning. But that being said, could you have had people that play instruments for funerals? Yes, and I will tell you that the Talmud actually tells us that people played instruments at funerals, especially when they accompanied the body to the burial place. So people would cry, they would play instruments, and they would be part of the accompaniment of the person to their burials.
But then they weren't allowed to play any more instruments for the rest of the year?
Well, the people who played the instruments were hired to do it.
Oh, I see. But the family who's in mourning,
Yeah,
they don't.
they wouldn't have played instruments, but
I
But
get it.
they wouldn't also be, like, the family's not even supposed to be technically pallbearers. I mean, people do it all the time, but the family wasn't even supposed to necessarily, have to carry the body.
Oh,
But again,
How did that tradition change?
because
You see that everywhere.
people,
Wanted to connect.
yeah, and between you and me, John, I've had funerals where the only people who were there were family, and who else is going to carry the body? I think kind of, people said, "What are we going to do?"
But it's
again, I mean,
usually it's not primary mourners, even if it's family.
yeah,
usually.
exactly. I mean, I'd have grandchildren, God willing, great grandchildren would carry. Children, immediate mourners, as Judith is saying, really shouldn't have to. And I would still say I'd rather have the staff carry the casket than the immediate mourner. But that's my take on it. I mean, that was the traditional take on it, but it's also my take that a person shouldn't have to also physically have to carry a coffin for their parent if they're physically exhausted. But that's my take on it. I'm not judging anybody who does it. It's not a matter of that. If people wanted to do it and felt like they felt moved to do it, I would say do it. But the understanding was you didn't have to. And that's my take on it. I mean, I would just tell people, you don't have to carry the casket of your family member. You could say, hey, traditionally we don't do that. Excuse me. All right. So, let's read this psalm, which I showed you last week that some of these psalms are said for certain things or for certain times. You'll probably be able to guess when traditionally this psalm was done. All right, Rosemary.
O Lord, do not punish me in anger. Do not chastise me in fury. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I languish. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones shake with terror. My whole being is stricken with terror. While you, Lord, oh, how long? O Lord, turn, rescue me, deliver me as befits your faithfulness. For there is no praise of you among the dead. In Sheol, who can acclaim you? I am weary with groaning. Every night I drench my bed. I melt my couch in tears. My eyes are wasted by vexation, worn out because of all my foes. Away from me, all you evildoers, for the Lord heeds the sound of my weeping. The Lord heeds my plea. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies will be frustrated and stricken with terror. They will turn back in an instant, frustrated.
Wow. Again, fairly short psalm. There are some powerful lines in there, right? So can anyone guess why someone would say this psalm?
Jerusalem under siege,
What?
Jerusalem under siege.
Well, that's a good one, right? But actually, some people actually look at this psalm for when they're not feeling physically well.
Oh, ill.
My bones shake with terror. My being is, so when somebody is scared, but also when they're physically, um,
In time of severe illness.
yeah. Does anyone want to guess what the most famous line in this psalm was? One of the most famous. I'll tell you, there's one line that became pretty famous because I'll play it not now, but I'll play it when we get to the song. I'll mention it, but anyways, that's not the main line. First line that I want to show you is this line right here. This one, line 6. This is a line that we get in other parts of Psalms. This is the first time we've read it. We don't have a lot of references to afterlife is in the Bible. We know that. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of discussion about what happens after we die. Sheol is mentioned as a place where we go. It does not seem like a happy place. This line here kind of affirms that. What's interesting about this is that it says there is no praise of you. People don't praise God when they're dead. Now, I mean, some people take that literally, that the dead can't praise God. They don't have a mouth. They don't have functioning organs to do this. But it doesn't say just dead. It says Sheol, which is the place of where people go in the netherworld. So people look at this as a very interesting theological line, which is that the dead don't praise God. That's only something the living can do, which is something that the rabbis developed to an important idea that to some extent the dead don't have to praise God because they're with God and they don't need to. We need to. But what's interesting about this is this doesn't seem like a good thing. This doesn't seem like a positive. If you read this in the original context, this doesn't seem to be like a great thing. Yeah, John.
In my note. And I'm going to bring up something interesting, I think, because we've discussed this multiple times. Biblical Israel knew of no afterlife with reward and punishment. Everyone, irrespective of behavior or social status, descended to the Sheol, the dark underworld, where one was cut off from God's presence and lived a quasi-life there. Among the dead may also be translated in the place of death, paralleling the Sheol. What's interesting to me is we've had this discussion of it's important today for all of them, at least for me, right? Was there a discussion of afterlife in the Bible? No. Is there? No. What's going to happen tomorrow? You know, what's
okay?
And we're debating this, and
so
this
what
goes all the way back to
yes. So look, there's a lot of different ways. So John's point is that it doesn't say there is no afterlife. It just says there's no heaven or hell. Everybody goes there, right? Irrespective of how good you were, everybody, or bad you were, everybody's there. That's what Sheol does seem to be. There's no, hey, the good people in Sheol are praising you, and the bad people are not praising you in Sheol because they're in hell. They're in a bad. It doesn't say that. It says everyone's in Sheol. It's the place among the dead. They're parallel. The dead and Sheol are paralleled. Now, of course, people didn't like that idea. So later on, Sheol becomes synonymous with hell. So where is this? Sheol is the bad place, which means, like, if you're good, you're not in Sheol. You're in the higher place. We don't want to be in Sheol. Sheol is hell. Okay,
Where did the idea of the world to come comes from?
It's not mentioned in the Bible, right?
Oh,
It's
okay.
not. So the Olam Haba, the next world, we get in rabbinic literature. By that point in time, people are very clear in their belief that there is a heaven and a hell based on this. I will say this, what seems to be, and again, this is why Judaism, like, we don't talk a lot about heaven or hell because our Bible doesn't. The Talmud does throughout. And again, for most of the last 2,000 years, Jews believed that there was a good place and then there was a bad place. So I want to make it clear. It's not like we didn't believe that. People have believed that. It's not, but it's not in the Bible. And that's one of the reasons why there's no dogma about it. It's one of the commandments that you have to believe in heaven and hell. It doesn't say that in the 613 commandments. This is the belief. No.
Resurrection. Maimonides believed in resurrection.
Maimonides, 100%. You're absolutely right, Gail. I was just about to say that. So when Maimonides lists his 13 principles of faith, one of them is believing in the world to come and in resurrection and the resurrection of every good person. The problem is that Maimonides is writing 1,000 years ago, right? He's writing after Christianity. He's even writing after Islam. So by the time that Christianity came on the scene, Judaism had already completely accepted the idea of heaven and hell, which is why Christianity completely accepted the idea of heaven and hell. But as I've told you, when people actually read the Bible, they're shocked to find there's no discussion of heaven and hell, which is why, as I told you, Seventh-day Adventists believe that when you die, you go to Sheol. Everybody goes to Sheol. Seventh-day Adventists believe there is no heaven opened up until Jesus comes back. When Jesus comes back, everyone will be resurrected and everyone will go to heaven who's good, and everyone who's bad will be wiped out like they never existed. So That's the Seventh-day Adventist belief based on what's in front of us. And the reason that Seventh-day Adventists did that is to some extent they went back and read the Bible and said, hey, none of this stuff that the church is doing is what you're supposed to be doing. They read the Bible and says, it seems pretty clear that we're supposed to keep Shabbat. It seems pretty clear that we're not supposed to eat pig. You know, that's why Seventh-day Adventists do those things that are considered Jewish things, because they read the Bible and they said, this doesn't make any sense that we're not doing this. But it also applied to their belief in heaven and hell. They said, where in the Bible does it talk about heaven and hell? Only in the New Testament in their Bible does it. And in their Bible, it seems to have to do with the resurrection of Jesus. So they were fine with saying only when Jesus is resurrected is there heaven or hell. Judaism never had that because we didn't have this belief that Jesus was going to take us to heaven or was necessary for the resurrection. So it wasn't an issue for us. But Judaism definitely over the last 2,000 years believed in heaven or hell. I will say part of it is, and I'm probably going to discuss this tonight at Shavuot, when we talk about it here in this room, and we gather together to celebrate Shavuot, the Bible, and especially the Torah, is only concerned with one thing, which is our covenant. It's what you and I, the reward and punishment is in this world, and it is our connection to the land of Israel and to our continuation in our land. That is the only thing the Bible is concerned about as far as what happens. Why do we good? Why do we do good? Why do we do bad? It's not so you get to heaven. It's so that we get to stay in the land of Israel. Everyone who studied the Torah with us now knows that. The Torah, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, especially again, I would say through most of all the way through the book of Kings, is not concerned with you dying and going to heaven or hell. It's concerned with you and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren being able to live in the land of Israel, unmolested, unbothered with their neighbors, unbothered by famine and starvation. That's all they're concerned about. So what, if you're good, you'll continue. If you are bad, the bad things will happen to you in the land. They're not concerned with individual punishment. Folks, those of you who've read enough of the Torah with us now know that. There is no discussion in the Torah about individual punishment being heaven or hell or the reward or punishment. It doesn't exist in the Bible. Yeah. And by the way, why does it exist later on? Because we don't have the land of Israel. So what's going to happen for the next 2,000 years is Jews are going to buy into the same system that every Christian and every Muslim believed, which is if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And it's only now that we start to say, well, I wouldn't say only now, but over the last couple hundred years when people said, do we really know if there's a heaven or hell? Can we really be certain that there's a heaven or hell? Is there any proof that there's a heaven or hell? When people started thinking about, these things rationally, is there really a God, right? That's when people started questioning, is there a heaven and hell openly? I mean, I'm not saying people didn't question it 1,000 years ago. They just couldn't openly question it. And so when people started questioning it, they started saying, hey, can we really talk about heaven and hell? And Jews started saying, hey, look, folks, it's not in the Bible. And we started reapprising it, interestingly enough now. We maybe say there's other ways that we get punished and other ways that we get rewarded. Yeah, John, you were going to say something.
I defer to you with regards to the thorough knowledge of all this. That has to be stipulated. But my common sense review of this, going back to the beginning of the species, is eventually this had to have been a control mechanism. Because they had laws or pseudo laws, etc., even commandments. People had to live with, they had guardrails. But we know that our species can't live within those guardrails very successfully.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a reward.
Yeah.
We need a reward, or we need to know. In other words, we have to be threatened with something good and promised with something, with something bad and promised with something good in order to not only, we see people break the law, no matter even, and so I think back then, right, like, take away the people living for 800 years, life was a bit shorter probably because it was a bit rougher. I don't know, I think it was more of a control mechanism, promising.
Yes, but again, when you don't have a homeland anymore, you can't threaten people with being kicked off the land when you've already been kicked off the land.
Right.
Once you've been kicked off the land, there is no carrot or stick. 100%. So again, the other issue is when the majority of the people that you encounter who are Christian, who are Muslim, are talking about the same thing, which by the way, they got from you anyways. You got it from Persians and from Babylonians and Greco-Roman beliefs of what happens after we die. Again, the synthesis of ideas of what happens after we die, where it came from, again, it's tough to pick apart where these things come from. But when everyone else believes it, but why do they believe it? Because Christians never had a theological connection to a land where they said, hey, if we're good, we're gonna merit blessing in our land and get to keep our land. And if we're bad, we're gonna get kicked out of our land. They didn't care. Christians, I mean, they were constantly, one barbarian tribe invaded and another, there was now a new king and a new language and a new whatever. And people, there was never that theological connection to the land. I would say the one change was about 250 years ago when the people who formed this country thought, yeah, this kind of covenanting as part of a community is really important, which is why the United States was kind of based on that. Now, again, we can make the argument the United States could also exist without necessarily being on this continent, but there definitely was a sense from the founding fathers and for the first 100 years or so of this country that this land was covenanted to us as manifest destiny and as brought forth on this continent, as Abraham Lincoln would say, that this was a special land that we now are in a covenant with. I will tell you that if you think about it, this country is based on a similar idea, which is not that most Americans don't believe in heaven or hell, but to some extent, if we maintain our society, if we maintain our laws, that we get to continue as a country. That's part of the kind of the promise back there in the back of our minds with the Declaration of Independence and our foundational documents. We believe that there's a covenant there that we've bound together with ourselves as a community, as a country. So that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, that's actually one of the things that makes me proud as an American, that we're kind of based on a similar covenantal idea. I know, I was just thinking that too, but they're on, but the Native Americans were on this land too. They just kind of had to be part of our covenant now. We had the same, John Canaanites had to deal with the same issue. They had to deal with the same issue 3,000 years ago, was they were now part of our covenant.
And that's the irony of it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about the United States, though, is that it was not based on ethnicity, and it wasn't based on where your ancestors came from. To some extent, the Bible is, because you're descendants of the promise is made from Abraham. I'm going to talk about that tonight. I mean, look, the reason the book of Genesis is there, what reason the book of Genesis is there is to establish the covenant was with Abraham. Okay, so we didn't make up this covenant during Moses' time. We didn't suddenly say, hey, this is our land. God told us it was our land in Genesis. The whole purpose of Genesis, folks, is not to teach us how the world was created. It was not to tell us the great story of the flood. It was to tell us that God made a special covenant with our ancestor Abraham, which gave us the land. Genesis chapter 12, when he tells Abraham, go take a journey across this land, Lech Lecha, that's why Genesis is there, folks. It's a great book, and don't get me wrong, I love Genesis. My favorite book of the Bible. I've told you that. Maybe Psalms comes next, but that's what it's there for. The other thing I was going to tell you, and I promise that we're going to get to this, and I'll play it for you when we get to the main part of the song. But there is a song which uses this phrase from Psalm 6, verse 4. It's the refrain, how long? Ad matai. It's a beautiful and powerful and kind of, again, plain of, it's a cry out to God. How long? How long is this going to go on for? How long am I going to suffer for? Right? I'm stricken with terror. How long, God? I mean, we could be saying that today, over the last 8 months in Israel. But this phrase, how long, was the response. I'm going to play it when we get to Psalm 40. When U2 wrote the song 40 on their album, one of their first albums, they will see it. It's Psalm 40. I'm not going to ruin it for you because we're not there yet. But the refrain in 40 is how long? How long? And U2 knew that this cry, how long, God, is essentially God. How long do we have to not be in the world that we want to be in, right? How long is there going to still be war? How long is there still going to be suffering? So that's why they wrote it. But we'll get to it when we get to 40. So got a couple of weeks before we get to Psalm 40. But let's take a look at Psalm 7. Any other questions, by the way, about Psalm 6? Because we're now going to get into a psalm that this one really seems to be written about something particular.
Talked a lot about him.
Yeah.
My thinking is that in feudal Europe, most people had miserable lives. So the church told them, if you're good, you'll have a good life after you die.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So in feudal Europe, it was definitely an issue. There's no question. But remember, where did Christianity first find its audience in the ancient world? Who are the first Christians?
Greeks.
Slaves.
Greeks. Yeah, Rosemary just said slaves. Roman slaves. And the slaves in the Roman world were promised salvation and freedom when they died. A beautiful life after living as a slave for your whole life. So the slaves who accepted Christianity and who felt a sense of hope definitely would have looked at Psalms. They would have looked at these prayers and thought about how horrible their lives were. So it goes back to the beginning. You don't have to go to the Middle Ages. You can go to the very beginning with people who would have said, I got to get out of this. And maybe when I die. All right, here's another. What does this mean? What is a shigion? Well, this is a weird one because, well, we'll get to it when we read it, because there are interpretations of what shigion means. Again, it probably had something to do with the way it was sung. But this one also tells us that this was sung to God by David when concerning Cush, a Benjaminite. Now, we understand that that's probably not the case, right? Glory, what does your note say in yours? Because I'm probably only going to be in yours.
Shigion, the word occurs only here. And then it just says Cush, not otherwise known, but as a Benjamite, he was probably a supporter of Saul. Hence, the title associates the psalm with Saul's determined attempts on David's life.
Yeah.
That's all.
Again, is it Cush or is it perhaps Kish, which was part of the Benjaminite family, part of Saul's family, right? It says specifically that Saul was descended from Kish. So is it Cush or was it Kish? And again, the Vav very easily can grow out of a Yud that someone just keeps making a little too long. So yeah, this probably had to do with David and his relationship with Saul, who wanted to kill him when David was working for Saul. Remember, David was getting very popular. He was winning wars. He beat Goliath, and people were singing songs about David, and it was driving Saul crazy. And according to tradition, this is the psalm he wrote in response to that. We're going to see other psalms that have to do with David's life. This is the first time we get to that. We have other psalms of David, but this is the first psalm about David's life. Actually, no, we saw the one about Absalom. Sorry. We had Psalm, I'll just flip back real quick. We had the Psalm of Psalm 3 when David fled from Absalom. So again, we don't know for sure that that's, again, the tradition was that this was a psalm that David wrote when he was running away from his son who was trying to kill him. Here's his father-in-law at the time trying to kill him. So David had a lot of rough times. Let's see what he says in this one.
O Lord my God, in you I seek refuge. Deliver me from all my pursuers and save me, lest like a lion they tear me apart rending in pieces, and no one saved me. O Lord my God, if I have done such things, if my hands bear the guilt of wrongdoing, if I have dealt evil to my ally, I who rescued my foe without reward, then let the enemy pursue and overtake me. Let him trample my life to the ground and lay my body in the dust. Selah. Rise, O Lord, in your anger. Assert yourself against the fury of my foes. Bestir yourself on my behalf. You have ordained judgment. Let the assembly of peoples gather about you, with you enthroned above on high. The Lord judges the peoples. Vindicate me, O Lord, for the righteousness and blamelessness that are mine. Let the evil of the wicked come to an end, but establish the righteous. He who probes the mind and conscience is God, the righteous. I look to God to shield me, the deliverer of the upright. God vindicates the righteous. God pronounces doom each day. If one does not turn back, but whets his sword, bends his bow, and aims it, then against himself he readies deadly weapons and makes his arrows sharp. See, he hatches evil, conceives mischief, and gives birth to fraud. He has dug a pit and deepened it, and will fall into the trap he made. His mischief will recoil upon his own head. His lawlessness will come down upon his skull. I will praise the Lord for his righteousness and sing a hymn to the name of the Lord Most High.
All right. Thoughts on this? thoughts on this psalm? Does anyone want to say anything?
Now, if this is of an earlier time, then was it Psalm 3 or 4 that you went back to anyway?
Yeah, Psalm 3.
So they're not in chronological order.
No, for sure not. That's very important. But anybody want to say anything about what's in this song?
It's a very fancy way of saying I'm rubber and you're glue.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's pretty it's pretty harsh, to put it mildly. His mischief will recoil upon his own head, his loss will come down upon his skull. By the way, that's Hamas, that's the word Hamas again. Lawlessness also could be translated as Mary, in line 17. Line 17, his blank will come down on his skull. Oh, they translated it as mischief. Anybody else have anything different?
So,
Nope. Violence. His violence will come down. The Hebrew for skull there is kadkado. Kadkad is your skull. It's not a very common phrase. The word rosh, head, is used all the time, right? We use the word rosh all over the place, but skull isn't used a lot. It's not a common word in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. So yeah. Anybody else want to say anything about this psalm? I mean, again, this is mostly pretty scary, pretty bad. Yeah, it's not positive. It's not like you wouldn't say, oh, this is a feel-good kind of song. I mean, maybe this last part, I look to God to shield me, to deliver of the upright, right? That's kind of nice. But most of this is, and again, the very last line, I will praise the Lord for his righteousness. That's nice.
My notes say it's an appeal to the Lord's court of justice when enemies attack.
Yeah. Which again, David felt when Saul was chasing him with, Saul's got the army. David has a band of followers at this point. When Saul was trying to chase him early on, David had his little group bandits, if you will, his little, which is kind of what the Bible says. He had his own little crew. And then Saul is chasing him with the army. The actual army is chasing him. And the famous scene where Saul was surrounding him and En Gedi at the springs, you know, Saul went to relieve himself, went to go to the bathroom in one of the caves, and David snuck in and cut off his robe, right? He cut off part of Saul's robe and snuck out. And then when David called out to Saul from the other side of the rocks where he couldn't get caught easy, he held up the robe and said, "Hey, Saul, look at your robe. Look how close I was to you." This is in the Bible. Amazing scene. He says, "I could have killed you, and I didn't. Leave me alone," right? And Saul felt very sad. Saul realized that David is maybe not really trying to kill him, usurp the throne, but Saul, of course, goes back into his crazy feelings. And again, some people say that Saul suffered from kind of a bipolar situation, that David early on, you know, could kind of calm him down. David actually, according to the story, right, he plays the harp for him and maybe sings psalms or sings songs to him to help calm him down. But once he's kicked David out, he doesn't even have that anymore. He doesn't have the ability to calm down. So the interesting thing about this interpretation of like what's going on here is that this is a shigion. Does anyone have any other translations for shigion? So there's an understanding that the rabbis understood here, which is interesting because it kind of tells us that David, well, we know David made mistakes, right? We know David did some really not very nice things, right, in his life. But there's a tradition that will tell you one of the things, one of the understandings is that the word shigion actually means mistake. This is a mistake. But David never should have sung the song, at least about Saul. Because essentially what is he asking for? He's asking for Saul to be killed. He's asking for Saul to be destroyed. And so the shigion is actually the mistake of David, that he sang this song against Saul, even though he had a right to, even though Saul was trying to destroy him, it wasn't right for him to do this. And that's the shigion. That's the actual, rather than be an instrument that was played on or a style that it was sung, that is a mistake that David did this. Because he never should have sung the song against Saul, because he essentially is praying for Saul's destruction. Shouldn't have done that. So David kind of realizes that later on, but kind of acknowledges the mistake. So he never should have been that harsh on Saul. Even if he had a reason to, he still shouldn't have. But again, as I told you, interestingly, the Psalms are not all filled with beautiful, beautiful things. We will get to Psalms that are beautiful, beautiful praises of God's world, beautiful praises of the beauty of the world. How, by the way, is that reflected in one of my favorite Psalms, Psalm number 8, for the leader on the Gittit, which again, it's going to say, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. But we believe that the Gittit was another kind of instrument. Some people say it's an instrument that they played in Gath, in the Philistine city, right? In Gath, where Goliath was from, that they played a Gittit, which was the instrument based on a Philistine instrument. Maybe it was, again, more of an electric guitar. No, it wasn't an electric guitar, but maybe it was more of a guitar that had, a different sound or a different set of strings, gave a different kind of feeling to it. We don't know. But again, this is another one that is said to be a Psalm of David. This psalm, by the way, and one of the reasons, again, why this is one of my favorite Psalms, is that this one, and there are a few of them in the Bible, that are really just beautiful psalms that you could say throughout the day. Let's take a look at Psalm 8.
O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth, you who have covered the heavens with your splendor. From the mouths of infants and sucklings you have found strength on account of your foes, to put an end to enemy and avenger. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you set in place, what is man that you have been mindful of him? Mortal man that you have taken note of him, that you have made him little less than divine and adorned him with glory and majesty. You have made him master over your handiwork, laying the world at his feet. Sheep and oxen, all of them, and wild beasts too, the birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever travels the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name throughout the earth.
Beautiful, right? And of course, it has that refrain, right? O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, like we had at the beginning, right? So that is a beautiful psalm. Again, there's a few psalms that kind of capture that beauty of nature. I mean, there's a lot of psalms that capture the beauty of nature. I said before, Psalm 23 is, lead me beside the still waters, you lay me in the green fields. It's beautiful, the allusions to nature in the Psalms. These ones, even more so, talks about the animals, right? Talks about the fact that you can see God's handiwork everywhere, in the animals, in nature. And what's so beautiful about it is that we recognize that, like, even the youngest baby is a reflection of is there. We have a phrase in English, right? Out of the mouths of babes, right? That's where it comes from. Mipi olalim. Look, even in this psalm, which is a beautiful psalm, 95% of it is just positive. This isn't like the other psalms that we read that have kind of a little bit of scariness in them. This one still, though, does have a little bit, right? You go through it, it's like, oh yeah, it still says right here to put an end to the enemy and the avenger, right? To get rid of my enemies, right? And then we have that, I said in Psalm 23, you set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. It's like, it's almost like no psalm can just be, well, it's not true, but most of the psalms, the vast majority, have a little bit of, but it's scary outside, which is kind of like life, right? There's a lot of stuff to be scared of. So even in this one, there's that little recognition that in the background, there's people or there's something bad out there. But there is this real understanding that God's world is amazing, right? There is beautiful stuff in the earth. There's beautiful stuff in the skies. There's beautiful animals. And this phrase is really one of the ones that kind of like blows our minds when we think about it, is that God has made us a little less than him or them. Here it's a plural to some extent. It seems a little bit more of a plural than the divine. Yeah, but it's us. You've made us a little less than divine. What does the King James have for verse 6, Mary?
5.
Oh, yeah.
For that must be
Yeah. Yeah. Even here it says the angels. The problem is the words are Elohim, which is why they translate it as divine. Lori, what does your translation say?
I could not hear Mary, so
hers was a little less than the angels.
Okay, mine says, you made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor.
So you see, Glory, you've got a pretty literal translation there, right? Because yours doesn't even say angels, because it doesn't say angels. There's a word for angels, right? Malachim would have been the angels. It says Elohim. Now, it's weird because we know the word Elohim is a singular word. We always say Adonai Eloheinu, right? We understand that that's a singular God, right? It's a one God. Here, the word is always translated to some extent as divine beings or angels, right? Right? Plural, meaning not like God. So to some extent, the understanding of this is that God's made us a little less than the angels, which is the way people have understood it. And it does seem to be here more of the plural, which is why divine, and the translation here divine means, hey, let's not open up what that means, right? Because if we say divine beings, which is what Glory says, which is really kind of what it is it means either little less than angels or little less than gods.
My
God
notes,
made us a little less than gods.
my notes say the exalted angelic creatures that surround God in his heavenly realm.
Well, yeah, you got to say that
Mhm.
because otherwise, are there other gods? Or is this like an admission that there's other gods? Look, what's so beautiful about this is the previous line, right? Ma'enosh, like what are we? That you're mindful of us, that you think about us, that you remember us. Like what are we? We're human beings. Yet you've made us almost like God. I mean, I would argue that this is one of the most powerful lines in the Bible, at least to understand how we are connected to God and how we perceive ourselves in the hierarchy, which is that we're not animals. We're almost divine beings. We're almost like God.
Is God in every person?
What?
Is God in every person?
Reversal? What do you mean?
Is God in every person?
Oh, in every person. Well, here it doesn't seem like, this is necessarily that kind of idea, but there is this idea that like as human beings, we're almost like that. And we would say that, look at what our powers are now as human beings. We have the power to destroy the world. So aren't we a little bit like God? In our conception of God 3,000 years ago, in the story of Noah, we believe that God would destroy the world with a flood and that would be it. It was almost it. Almost everyone died. Almost everything died. Well, we know now that we have the ability to destroy the world thousands of times over. We literally could blow up this planet. So are we not a little less than divine?
He had to have known that too, though.
Well,
Because he gave us the minerals, he gave us the intelligence. He had to foresee that the species was going to
yeah.
create something.
So we have divine attributes, right? We have an ability to create and destroy. That's divine. We see that as a reflection of divine. I'm only telling you this because this is one of the few places in the Bible where this actually tells us flat out, we are on the hierarchy just below God. I don't want to like, okay, well, we're higher than the animals. Well, the Bible says that at the beginning of Genesis, that we're given dominion over the animals. That doesn't mean, by the way, we're supposed to destroy them. It means we're given control to take care of them and protect them, and we're given power over them. But on the other hand,
We're also told Beth Elohim, right? We're made in the image of
yes.
God.
And here, though, it's literally told us that we're not only in the image of God, but we have the ability to act like God, that we're a little less than divine in maybe again, God's made us something very special. God's given us glory and majesty. God's given us a reflection and an ability to act like God in a way that is a tremendous responsibility. Again, I would say that this is one of the most powerful lines in the Bible for understanding who we are, at least our understanding in the Bible of where we are in terms of our relationship with God and where we are in this world, which is that we're a little less than divine. How many times have you seen that? You haven't. You haven't seen that anywhere. You haven't seen this kind of idea expressed, which is that we're not just one of God's creations. We're the pinnacle of God's creations. And there's a sense of humility here, because what are we that we deserve this kind of power? What are we? That question that's asked is, do we deserve this, right? Do we deserve this kind of power? So there's a very powerful setup here, which is the first part, ma enosh. What are we? What are we that you've remembered us and taken note of us? What is it that you like even take account of us? We're like, if you're thinking, hey, we're just an animal, that's what he just said. The psalmist just said that. Are we really anything other than just a bunch of cells? And yet the next line tells us that we're a little less than divine. Yeah, not only are we in the image of God, we are acting with God's power. It's pretty powerful. But again, I would say the basis of it is a sense of humility, right? This idea that, gosh, we're finite beings. But at the same time, we have a tremendous power.
It reminds me of Oppenheimer saying, the destroyer of worlds.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do we have an indication when this one was written?
No, we don't. And again, this one doesn't even say, hey, look, David wrote this, when he was, before he was king, after he was dealing with his problems with his children. It doesn't say, but it does say it's a Psalm of David. It does say that we have a tradition of saying, and again, but a lot of the Psalms, most of the Psalms will say, Mizmor LaDavid. This is a Psalm of David. But again, there's an understanding that everything is created by God. The animals are created by God. So they're also a handiwork. They're also, part of God's creations. The birds, the fish, they're all forms of God's creation.
Section, you made him master, parallels the beginning of
Yeah.
Genesis.
Yep. You've made him master. You've put within his hands, right? You've put it within you created him and you've put him, well, actually the phrase is interesting. It's actually even more beautifully, I just never noticed that before. You've made a master of your handiwork, right? You've put within him your ma'aseh yadecha, your work of your hands. This is why the word handiwork is perfect translation. Handiwork with your hands. You worked it, you made him. But you've put the world at his feet. You made the world with your hands, and you've put it at his feet. Look at that parallel. That's really good. Because we still say that. We laid it at your feet. We put it under your control. Laid it at your feet. It's the same idiom today. We did it with your hands, and we laid it in, and he's laid it at your feet. Wow. Laying the world at your feet. Tachat raglav. Like it's under your control. God's made it, giving you control of it, power over it, putting the world at your feet. Wow. So it's a very powerful psalm. It's a psalm that we're going to hear in a second. When we finish, we'll come back and we'll hear that psalm. What a beautiful, beautiful psalm. I mean, so many ideas in there that are, yes.
It's also scary. I don't feel powerful, especially now. I don't feel powerful.
Yes. Thank you, Floyd. Almost allowed me to move on before sharing this. Oh yeah. I'm sharing it. I'm sharing it. Yes, he's participating. Should make him read it, but Rosemary, you want to guess what Floyd, as a professor of oh wow. I'm gonna pop it up here. How could I almost thank you, Floyd, for popping this in as professor of. Okay, I'll give you a clue, folks. Shakespeare. Anybody? I'm talking to you, Rosemary.
Yeah, there's something in Hamlet.
Oh, there she. You did not let us down, Rosemary.
What a piece of work is man.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually get to the line. He knew right. Floyd knew right where it is. Act 2, Scene 2. yeah, Shakespeare, of course, knew this too. So here's the line. Hold it a second. I think I might have gone past it. Gosh, what an amazing play. Hold it a second. Gosh, I went to it and then it didn't, it keeps going to, hold it. Here. Here it is. So here's the line that Hamlet delivers. How beautiful. What a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason. How infinite in faculty, in form and moving. How express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is the quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, nor woman in either. Though by your smiling, you seem to say so. Wow, what a line. What a line. And it only works when you understand that he was riffing off Psalm 8. Because what he's doing is he's saying, God gave us these powers, or we understand these to be our powers, but what are we really? So he goes back to the line before, right? He goes back to the humility of the line before, which is, right? What is man that you are mindful of us? You know, what are we really? So he actually, in Hamlet's kind of evaluation of what really is going on, right? We're not like this. We're like this. We're like, why does God even take note of us? Because we're nothing. So, you know, he really calls into question whether we're living up to the potential that we have. What a powerful line. But again, it only works when you understand Psalm 8, when you understand how, again, by the time Shakespeare wrote this, this has already been part of human history for, 2,500 years. The people knew this line in Elizabethan England. That the line that our ancestors wrote in this little tiny country of Israel, there were no majestic pyramids. There was no powerful army ever brought together out of that country. But these words inspired people all around the world and inspired one of the most powerful plays ever written. Those lines work only because of this psalm, because of Psalm 8, because of this idea that we placed in the mind of humanity, that we're a little less than divine.
Rabbi, could I say one more thing?
Please say everything.
No, I'm sorry. The wonderful thing about this particular speech is that, of course, Hamlet is speaking in anything but secular terms. He's speaking very religiously, he's speaking philosophically. He's talking about himself and all men being the paragon of animals, but then he contrasts it with his own state of mind, which is he sees it as a quintessence of dust. But the more important thing, or at least as important, are the people who are listening to him speak don't understand this at all. When he says at the end, man delights me not, no, nor woman neither, though your smiling seems to say so. They're seeing this as sexual or secular. And he's so far beyond that at this point, but they don't understand that. They are defaming what he's talking about. They just don't understand what he's going through, which is, of course, one of the ultimate tragedies of the play. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's perfect. And again, that's the part of the play though that makes us, I mean, what makes Hamlet so powerful is that it speaks to the human condition and literally people saying at any given time, really? You think human beings are, look, how do you not look at the world around you and say, really? Is this the way I feel about humanity right now? So this again, the setup for the line of Psalms, the couple lines of Psalms that you've made us a little less than divine, adorned us with glory and majesty, is preceded by the, hey, but we're nothing. Like, what are we? We shouldn't be. And then again, in Shakespeare, he goes back to it. He finishes back. He flips it. He actually takes, oh, you think we're all of this? Come on, what are we? We're nothing. And it's that kind of bringing people back down to earth where you just go, oh man, he just dropped it on us. And again, this is the famous thing that I always, when you read this psalm, goes back to the tradition, the Hasidic tradition assigned to Rabbi Zusi of Hanapal, who said, what do you have to do in life is you have to write 2 letters to yourself, right? In one pocket, you keep one letter, in the other pocket, you keep another letter, right? In one side, you keep in there the letter that says, the whole world was created for me. You've made me a little less than divine, crown, adorn me with gold. And then that pocket, whenever you're feeling down, you open up that letter and you say to yourself, God, you gave me this whole world, right? You've made me master of your handiwork. You lay the world at my feet. And in the other one, you say, what are we? We're dust. We're dust and we're ashes. You started out as a putrid drop and we're going to wind up as ashes. And you keep that letter for yourself when you're feeling too full of yourself, when you're feeling like you have no accountability, that there is nothing that you can't do. And then you remind yourself, that's not where you're going to end up. So
I was
those
just
2
reading
letters,
Kohelet, where your
yep,
ashes were all vapor.
yep.
Yeah.
And again, this idea that we have of, sometimes needing to be brought up and sometimes needing to be brought down. There's a wisdom in that, which again, we understood that some days I need to get picked up, and other days I need to be reminded that this is not really your deal. So yeah, Hamlet definitely is on the side of bringing people down, but again, contained within that is a beautiful lesson of, but you know what? There's a reason for us. There's a reason for us being here. And at the end of the day, you know what my biggest takeaway from Hamlet is? That a person actually wrote that. And a person wrote that, 500 years ago, is kind of mind-blowing in the sense that, oh yeah, people have the capability of writing things and composing things and writing music and creating art that is mind-blowing. And it was mind-blowing 3,000 years ago when someone wrote this psalm, and it was mind-blowing 400 or 500 years ago when someone wrote a play that still speaks to us like that. It's amazing what human beings are capable of. And that's where you kind of say, oh, yeah, human beings are pretty amazing. So we'll read one more. We'll read maybe 2, but then we're going to hear, as I said, we're going to hear a little bit of Psalm 8. An interesting one that isn't very well known, but we're going to listen to one that I think is interesting from the standpoint of the mode or the modality, you'll recognize it from the mode that it's in. All right, so let's read Psalm 9. This is also Almut Laben, which translated differently, right? Hebrew is, of course, uncertain. Almut Laben may be over the death of a son. Almut Laben. Some people say that was written after the death of one of his sons. He lost a few sons, King David. But let's take a look at what this psalm is about. Because it seems strange that this was written on the death of a son. But again, so some people might say, Glory, what is you have a lot of notes in your Bible. What does your Bible say for Psalm 9?
It's got a lot. I'm trying to look through the notes to just get to what that part is. Hold on one second. Let me just look and see if I can find. Sorry.
No,
Not really saying. I'll just
it
read.
doesn't say anything about the death of a son.
No, not that I found. 1 second, because it's like a very long note.
Okay.
I'll just read it. Psalm 9 and 10 were sometimes viewed as one psalm is known from the Septuagint. How to pronounce it?
Septuagint. Yep. The Greek version.
Okay. Whether they were originally composed as one psalm is not known, though a number of indicators point in that direction. Psalm 10 is the only psalm from Psalm 3 to 32 that has no superscription, and the Hebrew text of the two psalms together appears to reflect an incomplete acrostic structure. The first letter of each verse or pair of verses tends to follow the order of the Hebrew alphabet near the beginning of Psalm 9 and again near the end of Psalm 10. The thoughts also tend to be developed in 2-verse units throughout Psalm 9, is predominantly praise for God's deliverance from hostile nations. It concludes with a short prayer for God's continuing righteous judgments on the naughty nations, or on the haughty nations.
That's true. That too.
Okay. Let's see. Let's skip over here. As the nations were in their attacks on Israel, the conjunction of these two with a single psalm is not unthinkable, since the attacks of the wicked, whether from within or from without, on the godly community are equally threatening to true Israel. Praise of God's past deliverance is often an integral part of prayer in the Psalter, as also in other ancient Near Eastern prayers. Such praise expressed the ground of the psalmist's hope that his present prayer would be heard, and it also functioned to motivate the Lord to act once more in his people's behalf. For other lengthy prefaces to prayer, see something else. Okay, hold on. So that's really all it says. And then the title for the director of music, to the tune of, it says nothing more is known of the apparent tune titles. So it really doesn't say anything like that.
Yep. Okay. So it didn't really talk about that, but it did talk about the fact that there is a tradition that Psalm 9 and 10 go together. Probably because there is no, as you heard, no superscription at the beginning of Psalm 10. I will tell you there is an alphabetic structure to it to some extent, but it doesn't go throughout. So the fact that it's an alphabetic acrostic is a little problematic. If it's Psalm 9 and 10 go together, then we wouldn't be at Psalm 150. It would mean that like Psalm 151 would be Psalm 150. So it would throw off all the numbers of the Psalms. It wasn't an issue for us, but we don't have a tradition that these were separate Psalms. The Septuagint does, and the Septuagint's very old. So it's not that it's not possibility. The Septuagint was done by Greeks, Greek Jews. It was not done by Christians. It was done by Jews. So is it possible that there were Jewish traditions that these were one psalm that was split later on? It's possible. But for a long time, we've sung these psalms as separate psalms. But let's take a look at Psalm 9, and probably we'll read 10 today too, because again, some people say that they're connected, mainly because the next psalm, Psalm 10, doesn't have that Mizmor LeDavid at the beginning of it. Not all of them do, though. It's just so far, all of them have.
I will praise you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell all your wonders. I will rejoice and exult in you, singing a hymn to your name, O Most High. When my enemies retreat, they stumble to their doom at your presence. For you uphold my right and claim, enthroned as righteous judge. You blast the nations, you destroy the wicked, you blot out their name forever. The enemy is no more, ruins everlasting. You have torn down their cities, their very names are lost. But the Lord abides forever. He has set up his throne for judgment. It is he who judges the world with righteousness, rules the peoples with equity. The Lord is a haven for the oppressed, a haven in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust you, for you do not abandon those who turn to you, O Lord. Sing a hymn to the Lord, who reigns in Zion. Declare his deeds among the peoples. For he does not ignore the cry of the afflicted. He who requites bloodshed is mindful of them. Have mercy on me, O Lord. See my affliction at the hands of my foes. You who lift me from the gates of death, so that in the gates of fair Zion I might tell all your praise. I might exult in your deliverance. The nations sink in the pit they have made. Their own foot is caught in the net they have hidden. The Lord has made himself known. He works judgment. The wicked man is snared by his own devices. Higayon Selah. Let the wicked be in Sheol, all the nations who ignore God. Not always shall the needy be ignored, nor the hope of the afflicted forever lost. Rise, O Lord, let not men have power. Let the nations be judged in your presence. Strike fear into them, O Lord. Let the nations know they are only men. Selah.
Yep. So it ends with a Selah, right? It ends with a phrase that we believe, can kind of end an idea. But we also have a Selah here, so it doesn't necessarily end there. There's a lot of things in this psalm. First of all, the psalm's a little bit longer than the other ones that we read. If we read it all as one psalm, it's really long. So that's one of the reasons why I think, we thought it's not really one really, really long psalm, but two kind of psalms around the same length. Again, the issue is none of the psalms we've read so far don't have an inscription, and we're not going to find any until about 15 psalms from now, 20 psalms from now, will we have that. So
where did you get the that it was about a son dying? I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like it about death of a
what?
son. It doesn't seem to me like it's about the death of a son.
Oh, no, exactly, right? So that's
So
one
where
of
did you get the idea that it was supposed to be?
because the word's mut laben, right? So if we understand mut laben as death of a son, then he wrote this after the death of one of his sons. But yes, you're absolutely right. This doesn't seem to be about the death of a son. So that's why some people say maybe al mut laben is some kind of musical direction. Because think about it. It doesn't really say this was about David during the time. This was not, all means on, right? Now it could be concerning or about, but it also could be, mut laben could be like some kind of instrument that we don't know exactly what it is, which is why it says meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Because it doesn't seem to be about a death of a son, absolutely. As a matter of fact, this seems to have a lot of the ideas that we've already seen, praising God, talking about celebrating. But also, if you notice, again, how many times do we hear the word, my enemies retreat, right? Look, maybe I'm noticing this now when Israel's at a time of war, that I'm focusing on this a lot more, but I never really realized how many times the word enemy was used in the Psalms. I mean, I always knew that there was like the dark side of the Psalm, right? It's bad, it's death, it's this, it's destruction, it's, God, foil the work of the other nations and all that stuff. Like, I knew that was there. What I didn't really stop to consider is the word enemy is used all the time. All the time. I mean, again, it's in Psalm 23. You set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I mean, that's used as an example of things that God will do for me, right? All the good things that God will do for me. God will be my rock, my salvation, in the Psalm, the whole idea is God's my shepherd. God's going to take care of me. But it's not just that God's taking care of me, but is taking care of me specifically in the presence of my enemies. So, I'm maybe, again, more sensitive to the word oyev now, which is enemy. It's everywhere in the Psalms. The word enemy is used all the time. And it's like now I've like kind of noticed it a lot more. But again, the wicked, all of the dark side of the Psalm, I always notice that. I mean, you can't not notice it as you're going through the Psalm. You're going, gosh, people saying this, they were like, and you destroyed the wicked, like, gosh, you seem pretty excited as you're talking about the destruction of bad people. But, I mean, we have no reason to believe that people also across the river or north of them and the Canaanites were doing the same thing when they went to war with us, that God destroys us, when their God destroys us. So we have every reason to believe that this is what people did in the ancient world, sang about how their God would destroy other peoples. But it is weird that it's in our Psalms, and it is there, that part of it. It's not just the positive energy stuff, if you will. It's also God's going to wreak havoc on the people who are on the other side. And this one in particular, actually, we see something that we don't see in a lot of the Psalms, is it actually calls out Zion in particular. It actually calls out Jerusalem. It actually uses the word Zion a couple of times. It's not just like once, it throws out the word Zion many times, right? Right? So this is an idea that, oh my gosh, Zion is, not just a concept, right? It's not just the Jewish people. It's not just Israel. It's the gates of Fair Zion. It's the city of Jerusalem. It's the physical city of Jerusalem. So that is here, right? And God is going to have wreak vengeance. We're not going to finish, we're not going to go through Psalm 10 right now, even though, again, some people say it's connected. We will, and because you see, Psalm 11 begins again, for the leader, Lam Natseach LeDavid, of David. There it doesn't say Mizmor LeDavid, it just says of David. But in Psalm 11, but we will read Psalm 10. But right now, I want to finish today with a version of Psalm 8. And this one's an interesting one because it was written by a Jewish guy. Well, it was partly written by, it wasn't written by a part Jewish guy. Let me say it right. It's written by a Jewish guy and also written by a guy who's not Jewish. But the guy who wrote this who's not Jewish also wrote about other biblical people. He wrote music from other biblical people. And this is from a musical which never made it. This is from a musical that premiered on Broadway and died a week later. It was a really great idea. I think it was a great idea for a musical. It just was not executed well. And it was backed by one of the biggest media companies in the world, Disney, but it didn't make it. And the people who wrote this Psalm 8 did it for a musical called King David. And it was written by Alan Menken and Tim Rice. Now, what I would do is I would actually like to play it without telling you that it's Alan Menken and Tim Rice, and have you try to guess, because you can definitely hear it. But the words are Psalm 8, and you'll hear this is a very Alan Menken score. Tim Rice didn't have to do that much writing because the Bible wrote it for him. But Tim Rice, as you know, was the collaborator with,
John,
well, he was a collaborator with Elton John, but who was he collaborator with before? Somebody. Come on, our musical people. Who did he work with? Where's Mark Kaplan? Hello? Oh, we have no musical people here today? Hello? Nobody? Hello? No? Okay, I'm going to show you before because you'll recognize his style from other things. You work with this dude, right? So he wrote Joseph and he wrote Jesus Christ Superstar. So he knows how to write Bible stuff. But this is one that he wrote with Alan Menken doing the music. And Alan Menken, of course, was the guy who helped bring Disney back to musicals, right? Right? Am I right? Little Mermaid, Hercules. Come on. Everyone knows Alan Menken. He did a lot of great musicals. Here it is.
Lord, how your name shines in glory.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
And above all the earth. Out of the mouths of mere babes, very sucklings, your strength will flow. Thus we grow, confounding your enemies, right from our moment of birth.
I don't know why it's not playing louder.
When I consider your heavens, the universe you have ordained, why would creation of man be of any concern to you. Only through love can this be understood, and through mercy explained. And man is made no small thing, and whether slave or king, he is with honor crowned by God. He is allowed control and command of the whole of the works of your hand, Lord. Lord, how your name shines in glory, in and above all the earth. Human afflictions and petty distractions we must ignore, rage no more. Peace comes to those who believe God has faith in their worth.
No. So it never made it. And again, maybe it's relied too much on singing the Bible, but you can hear that that's an attempt to bring the story of David to stage. Did not work. It was a failure.
Can we see it like on YouTube or something?
The musical? That's a
Yeah.
good question. I don't know. I don't know if anyone ever recorded it, video. Disney kind of buried it. They didn't want people to know that that it even came out.
Hmm.
It was a failure. And it opened on a big theater. I think they had just dedicated a theater in New York for it, and it was supposed to be a big rollout, and it tanked. Never made it. And Alan Menken and Tim Rice are two of the biggest musicians for musicals that you could possibly imagine.
Did you see it?
I never got to see it. It didn't last long enough.
Oh, I see.
Some people have performed parts of it before, but no, I never had a chance to see it. Somebody was saying something?
Bert, go ahead.
Oh.
You say.
Well, the musical The Ten Commandments was another one that tanked.
Did you hear the musical Ten Commandments was another one that tanked?
Yeah. I can't think of too many ones that were too based on the Bible that have succeeded, right? I don't know, Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat is kind of a very loose interpretation of the story in Genesis. But overall, yeah, we have not been successful at bringing this stuff to Broadway. But
years ago, you put out a CD with the Psalms. I used to play at Camp Newman. Do you still have it?
The Psalms?
Yeah, you had a CD with all this.
I will send that. No one uses CDs anymore, but I will definitely share the playlist. I do have the playlist for Psalms, but we got to get there. We're putting it. No, I do have most of them, but
I used to play.
I don't want to tell people ahead of time. It's going to ruin the surprise. But,
sorry.
That's Psalm 8, and I thought it's a pretty version, but and again, you're bringing two of the greatest minds in music onto how to put that out. But it was very Menken, very Tim Rice style. But yeah, for whatever reason, it has not been not successful. So next week, we'll read a few more Psalms. I promise you, as we get closer to Psalm 23, like Psalm 23, we might talk about for a good half hour, 45 minutes. We'll talk about Psalm 23 because of how well known it is and how powerful it is. And people have written books. There are books written just about Psalm 23. I promise you. There's a great one that Harold Kushner wrote, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. He wrote a whole book just about Psalm 23. And he's not the only person. So when we get to some of the Psalms that people know really well, but yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Floyd, for bringing back the Shakespeare, the allusions to that. There are a couple other Psalms that we'll bring up when we, as we get to them, that also find their way into the Shakespearean world. But again, for music, popular music, you'll see them a lot. So everybody, hopefully we'll see you tonight for Shavuot. We will be streaming. We'll be bringing our friends from Beth Shalom together with us for Shavuot. So Hag Sameach, everyone. Have a great.
Is there a link? Is there a link? Tell me, is there a link on your?
It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on Facebook.
Okay. At what time?
7 tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Take care and
Bye,
Hag
everybody.
Sameach.
Hi,
Have a good
thank
night.
you.
Thank you,
All right,
Rabbi.
everybody. Bye-bye.